So the Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe. The Soviets didn't just go in and say, right, it's communist now, it's sorted. They wanted to give it the feel of like it had happened legitimately. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. They wanted to be able to say to the world, look, we didn't force them to be communist. So it was kind of done on the sly, underhand tactics. And to begin with, to sort of keep the whole Grand Alliance and the sort of facade, if you like, that everything was fine and the Soviets were doing as they should have been, as what they'd said they would do at Yalta and Potsdam, they allowed something called coalition governments. Now, a coalition is a joining of two sides, so two different teams, if you like, two different political parties. We had a coalition government before the current government, when the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives were in power. Well, in this case, the coalition was between a communist party and some other party, depending on which countries you're looking at. Of course, you can see from the handouts today, you're looking at the Baltic states, which is Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, Romania, Yugoslavia, Greece and Bulgaria. Now, there is one exception to this, or three, should I say, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, which are all next to each other on the map, because the Soviet Union just annexed them. Annexed is a key word. It just means adding to a country's territory. So the Soviet Union just got those three countries and said, right, it's part of us now. So there was no more Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. It was part of the Soviet Union, which the large part made of Russia, but there was all sorts of other countries that made up the Soviet Union. Anyway, with Czechoslovakia, this is a good example of Czechoslovakia because it really epitomises what the Soviets did. To begin with, there was this coalition government between communists and between some non-communist parties. That was from 1946 onwards. However, in 1948, the communists used the army to seize control. What else was going on in 1948? You might have a think about some of the things you've learnt so far. But certainly by that point, the Truman Doctrine had been said, the Iron Curtain had been said, so things were going on the other side as well. So 1948, it might be significant that that's when the communists in Czechoslovakia decided to take over, forget the coalition government, and many of the non-communists were arrested. The foreign secretary of Czechoslovakia was murdered. And then they had elections, and the elections were rigged. It's another thing the Soviets did. They held these elections, but they rigged them. So the communists won. That was a surprise. And that was that. So Czechoslovakia had a communist government, job done. Poland, that had a coalition government to begin with. But in 1947, rigged elections meant that the communists got into power. And the leader of the non-communist parties had to leave, fled from Poland fearing for their lives. In East Germany, well, they just made that communist, and that was all after the Berlin airlift, really. That was sort of the turning point in East Germany. It was just a communist government installed there. In Romania, the coalition government was set up as per usual, but by 1947, the monarchy, so there was a royal family in charge of Romania, was abolished, leaving the communists in control. In Hungary, there were free elections in November 1945, not rigged elections, and the non-communist Smallholders Party won the most seats. But 2 years later, they held rigged elections. Guess who won? You got it, it's the communists. So they were in control. In Greece, well, they were fighting the civil war, which we've already learnt about, where the communists fought against the monarchists, or the non-communists against the communists. The non-communists, originally backed by Britain and then by the USA. The communists were backed by the Soviet Union, but they didn't provide support. They didn't provide materialistic things like weapons and things. So the communists in Greece were defeated in that civil war. And so Greece did not fall to communism, and you can see that on your map. Bulgaria, a communist-dominated coalition government was set up. towards the end of the war, when the Germans were kicked out. And in November 1945, there were rigged elections. Who won? Communists. In 1946, they got rid of their monarchy as well. So, pretty much every case, what they did, they had a coalition government to begin with, and then they had rigged elections at some point, and the communists won. So there's a commonality of the sort of things the Soviet Union were doing to take over Eastern Europe. But there's one big exception, apart from the Baltic states, an even bigger exception, and that was a country known as Yugoslavia. You might be thinking, Yugoslavia, where's that? Well, Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Herzegovina. You might have heard of those countries maybe from Eurovision or football. Well, those countries altogether made up Yugoslavia. It was one country at that time. And what happened in Yugoslavia is the Yugoslavians had kicked the Nazis out themselves. So the Soviets did not kick the Germans out of Yugoslavia, the Yugoslavians did it. And it was the Communist Yugoslavian Party, led by someone called Marshal Tito. Marshal was his title. And so they kicked out the Germans and they started creating their own communist country. And Stalin was like, brilliant, we will dominate Yugoslavia as well. However, Tito was having none of it. There were no Soviet troops in his country, unlike Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. The thing that Yugoslavia didn't have is the Soviet army in their country. So Tito could do as he liked, and he actually fell out with Stalin and had his own communist little state over the side that wasn't controlled by Moscow, by the Soviet Union, by Stalin. So Yugoslavia was communist, but it was all there on its own. And there you have it. That's your lesson for today on how the Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe, or took over Eastern Europe, should I say.